Hello, everyone, and welcome back to another episode of I Like to Read with me, your host, Rachel Polanski. Pretty much just chilling here again in a classic little graphic band tee and some Lululemon Align shorts. Not sponsored, but they are the freaking best bike shorts on the market. I just also love a good band tee. Love some Fleetwood Mac. Would pop in a little bit of some Rihanna or something, but we got copyright issues, and no, it's not a singing channel. You don't want to hear me sing karaoke. We're just gonna shift this into a karaoke channel. So if you're new here, or if you're just joining us, for the first or second time, I read about 5 or 6 books a week, and then this is my little corner of the podcasting, YouTube, internet world where I get to blabber on for a little bit and talk about them and recommend them to you. Last week was a very, very special episode. I was joined by my former professor, Tony Magistrale. Tony is a Stephen King horror expert. I didn't mention this in the podcast and I should tell him, but I think there was like a freshman orientation or like a freshman, no, it wasn't even, I don't know if it was either an orientation. No, I think it was sort of one of those like intro to the college. Like I got into University of Vermont. I was pretty sold on wanting to attend. So it was, like admitted students day. And I knew I was going to study psychology. And so that was in the College of Arts and Sciences, and Tony teaches English at the College of Arts and Sciences. And at the time, I think he was teaching a course about vampires and something with Gothic history. And he just talked about that. He might have even been the chair of the English department at the time. I know he used to be. And that really just inspired. I was like, oh, we can learn about cool things in college. We don't have to do algebra. And that wasn't exactly what sold me, but I do want to give him a little bit more credit. And then through that, we became close friends. I took 2 of his classes and was always so engaged with his work. I've kept in touch with him to see what he's working on. Anyone who loves horror and loves, is so passionate about such a specific topic, in this case, Stephen King. I'm always a fan of. I learned so much from him. I learned a lot about Stephen King. I learned a lot about the American Gothic oeuvre in general. So if you haven't checked out that interview, he has a new book out, Stephen King and American History. So like I said in that interview, even if you haven't read any Stephen King, you're unfamiliar with his work, this might be a great place to start. It is an academic text, but it's very readable. It's very palatable, but it's packed with a ton of cool analysis and information on Stephen King that we haven't heard before. So that interview will be linked below. Make sure you check it out. It's a longer episode. We talked for a little bit under an hour, and then we caught up a little bit offline after. And I could have talked to him for hours and hours, but I figured, got to keep it a little bit concise. But it was super fun. I've engaged with him, like I said, a little bit on Facebook and emails and whatnot, but I haven't really talked to him, and especially in such an academic discourse, pretty much since I graduated. Even before then, that was over 4 years ago. So it was really nice to revisit those roots. I'm hoping to get more special guests. If you are an author watching this or listening, and even if I've already talked about your book or, I haven't, I would love to hopefully bring in more authors, and bring in more people. Just, I'm passionate about reading and I want to share their works, and I will, it's always best to hear it directly from the source themselves. I can tell you how great it was as a reader, but I'm not the one who wrote it. So to hear it, from the mouths of babes. So we'll see what happens, but that was just a really nice blast from the past revisit. It's always, I enjoy interviewing people. I enjoy talking to people and learning about their crafts, but especially when I have a personal connection, it just really, brings some joy to my otherwise dark and cold and dreary heart. I'm just kidding, not, Edgar Allan Poe. But anyways, today I am once again cheating and I'm bringing you 6 books, but I'm going to tie 2 together again. So without further ado, let's get started on the first one. The first one is A Children's Bible by Lydia Millet. This is kind of it definitely has Lord of the Flies meets The Leftovers. It's the best way to present something new is to present it as something that's 2 already existing things that people are pretty familiar with, and then to be but this is a new spin on it. So there's a group of teenagers, they're with their families in this weird, you can already tell from the beginning of the book that something is weird. It's not necessarily post-apocalyptic, but it's definitely sort of this is a big moment before something is going to happen. It's the calm before the literal storm in this case. A children's Bible. I mean, there is a literal children's Bible in this novel. I won't really get into the significance of that. But it was a departure from a lot of more dystopian, revelatory things that I've read. It was very, grounded in the minds of these teenagers who were the ones acting like the adults, and the adults are the ones who are really the teenagers and the kids, or acting like kids. And then to have them experience this sort of crazy flood and how that impacts them and heightens things, and then how the world is looked at through we stay focused, even though there's these larger things happening in the world, and larger sort of catastrophic events. We really stay focused on this group of teenagers and children, but there's enough references and sort of groundedness in the present day too, where it's not so like singular in time. Like, it really has a very not necessarily 2020, but like a late 2020s. You know what I mean? Feel. So that was, it's also relatively short, I think, 224 pages. So a really good amount happens. It's not, necessarily just a slice of life and here's my train of thought. Like, there's a clear beginning and middle and end. It's, a little more cinematic. So if you want something a little bit more fast paced, but also still very well written and fresh and modern, I've read quite a few other Lydia Millet books. I haven't read all of them. So if you do read this or you're familiar with her work, this is definitely one to check out. So the next two that we're going to cheat with, the first one is called Wandering in Strange Lands. A Daughter of the Great Migration Reclaims Her Roots by Morgan Jerkins. Morgan Jerkins is a young Black author. I believe she is in her very late 20s, like 28, 29. Don't quote me on that. I read her first book, This Will Be My Undoing, which just explored her identity to her race in the larger socioculture sphere. Since then, I followed her on Twitter. She's got a ton of like deep academic intellectual thoughts, nicely balanced with like 90 Day Fiancé live tweeting, which I am so all about. So even though I don't know her, I follow her on Twitter and I like a lot of her tweets. So reading this book, which is deeply personal, I feel like, whatever someone presents on Twitter is definitely not, who they are fully in real life. But I feel like I know a little, or, the version of her that she presents to the outside world. And so through this already deeply personal story, I already feel like I had a background with her and got to know her. So this book deals with her exploration of her family history and her family background, dating all the way back to her great-great-grandparents who were sharecroppers. Like I said, Morgan Jerkins is a young Black contemporary author living in New York City, very, at the time of this, what started this book is kind of very distant from her roots, and her mother and father were divorced and have very different families. And through writing this book, she realized that she didn't know anything about them, and she didn't know, her own history. She didn't know the larger history of Black people. She really, the way that she explores it is, near at the time of this writing and in her most recent life, like New York City is her home, and New York City has grounded her. But for Black people historically, they have migrated so much and they haven't ever been able to feel rooted and concrete. So she goes all the way back to, the slave trade, and even before that, and when Africans were displaced from their homes. And then she traces her own personal history through her father and her mother's family, which are very different. One's in like the deep South and one's in sort of like Midwestern Ohio. There's also a really great bit at the end where she ties in her own personal journey and a sojourn to Los Angeles, which didn't end up working out, but was still very formative in her life. And, that's something that you don't really learn about someone through Twitter. That's something that she revealed about herself and shared and opened up her own personal story for us. And it's just really, it's timely, of course. When is it not timely? But it's just, you can tell the amount of passion and love, and just to let someone so deeply open up their family history, and we go alongside that journey with her, literally a journey. She's driving herself, and she might occasionally, she meets up with tour guides and local people of those areas, but she's not, she's she's coming in, not with a journalism aspect, but really, with a memoir heart and with care and passion for these people that she's writing about. So that one is fantastic. I also recommend checking out her other book and following her on Twitter for some fun takes. And kind of tied along with that is Caste, The Origins of Our Discontents by Isabel Wilkerson. So this book is a nonfiction look, as it says, into the history of caste. I mean, that's a word that is typically really only associated with India. There's a caste system there, which is very rigid. I think it's broken up into 5 or 4 different categories, and then there's the untouchables, and it's pretty much, it's even larger than class. It's caste is really, you're born into it, and it's something that's very hard to get out of. So she explores the Indian caste system, but she also uses it as a comparison for the German Nazi regime and American South slavery. And so, of course, that ties into Wandering in Strange Lands, looking at Black people as a caste and race as a caste system that separates us, and how that is permeated through the years, how that has affected different groups of people, and how, we'd like to think that we don't have a class system and we don't have a caste system, but, and we look at India as something that's so foreign and crazy. And, the same thing is happening in America. And she's just very, it's research intensive, but she's very clear about her arguments. She's very, it's some of the stuff is definitely not mind-blowing, but to see the way it's presented and then the way it's compared to other worldly things is eye-opening. It's sweeping, but clearly, like despite some of these things that she's talking about that have happened, 200 or 300 years ago or even more, like it's still so relevant today, more than ever. She ties in some personal experience, but this is definitely more solidly like nonfiction research as opposed to Morgan Jerkins, which definitely has tons of research and heart, but that's much more of a memoir journalistic piece. And they both touch on similar topics, but so that's why I wanted to put them together, but it would be remiss to say they were, the same type of book. They touch on similar topics, but they're each worth a read. They're each worth a look. If you only have time for one, whether you prefer more of the personal, journalistic, investigative microcosm or looking at the larger macrocosm throughout history, and exploring different cultures besides the cultures that exist in our own culture that we don't know about. So that is Caste. And let's see. Next, we have Good Morning, Destroyer of Men's Souls, a memoir of women, addiction, and love by Renata, Aron. For some reason, there's a lot of memoirs and nonfiction in this. Again, we're just at the mercy of the library roulette. All of these I either had holds on them, or even though I have holds on like 20 books at a time, I like to just kind of scroll through and see what's available, because for some weird reason, sometimes books will be available that I have holds on, but they haven't given them to me yet. So like I said, it's roulette. And then when you do hit that roulette and you find a book that maybe I didn't have on hold yet, or was still on my to be read yet, and it's readily available, I'm like, ooh. So, I do typically I have no qualms with reading, 3 or 4 nonfiction books in a row, but I do like to sprinkle in, a little bit more fiction now and then. This episode, as I'm learning and talking, seems to be pretty nonfiction heavy. And that is just what it is. I think, that's the beauty of nonfiction. That was, again, there's just like fiction, there's so many avenues that can be explored. So Renata, Aron's book is kind of a nice in the middle, if I were to, place it going back to Morgan Jerkins and Caste, which was by Isabel, which I already closed the window, and I'm sorry, so I forgot her last name, but it will be linked down below. And so this is part exploration into the temperance and Al-Anon movement, but it really only resonates because of her own personal experience with addiction. She is not an addict herself, but throughout her life, both her older sister and long-term partner are seriously affected by addiction, and of course that plays into her. She deals with codependency, which is just as crippling and invasive as the addict and the addiction themselves. So she looks into that. She's very personal, she's very raw, and then that's tied in nicely with just the role of codependence in the larger scheme of things, the role of temperance and women as alcoholism was on the rise sort of when the temperance movement began. it's really, it's written, like, it's like, the memoir parts are what stick out to me more. I mean, it's definitely not, there's a lot of research and well thought out ideas that go into it that don't pertain to her, but everything is written with the intention of this is how I got to where I am today, and there's a long history of other women and other people like me, and you're not alone. And also, like, my experience was painful and rough, and that doesn't mean that I'm not still growing and learning from it, but I want to share that experience with others. And through this sort of unique method, I think if it had just been a memoir, it might not have had the same gravitas, because as she notes in the book, there really isn't a ton of contemporary literature and memoirs and personal stuff about codependency, and from the perspective of the person who doesn't, personally suffer from addiction, but is still just as affected by the trappings, by the ups and downs of the cycle, and, addicted to the addict, and how, it's not so easy. It's easy just to say, if someone's an alcoholic or an addict and, being ridiculous to you, to, just walk away. And it's not that easy, the relationships that you form with these people, and it's a disease and you want to help them. So she really unpacks a lot of interesting ideas, and her own personal experiences add a nice balance and weight to that. So definitely check that one out if you're interested at all in sort of a deeper, darker personal experience marred with, or filled, I guess, with larger historical context that just leave, it's also like oddly uplifting too, because it just goes to show that no matter how dark or how rough people's journeys are and the things that you hit along the way, like, there is some peace and sovereignty. And also it lends some cadence to the fact that, it's not necessarily a start and a finish. Like, lives, and especially the lives of addicts and those who are personally close to them, it's a day by day, ongoing struggle journey, and the destination might never be found, but just being along for that ride and being there is really, that's the best part you can do. So check that one out. Next, we have Life Events by Karolina Waclawiak. I'm butchering that pronunciation, I'm sure, but again, it will be linked below, as is everything else. So we got a classic woman, Evelyn, who's kind of just, she's got a shitty husband, she's about to get divorced, her life is kind of all over the place, and then she finds this weird job position, she's unemployed, helping, with end-of-life care, helping people end their lives who voluntarily want, if they have cancer or some sort of debilitating disease and they want to take on their life, so she's an end-of-life caregiver. And so it's very, I want to say it's like a little bit Charlie Kaufman-esque. It's a little bit, it's not satirical. It's satirical. It has, layers of strange, absurd surreality to it. There's definitely no magical realism, but also in California in general, like, end-of-life caregiving is not a legal practice. So it kind of delves into the craziness of what that would look like if it were to be a little bit more established and real and underground. The people that she meets and does end up working with for her end-of-life caregiving are vastly different and wild and just, like, very well created. They are like a wacky cast of characters, but so morbid that these people are terminally ill and she's helping them die. And then her own life is very, like, messy, and of course, she's an end-of-life caregiver, so naturally, she's not terminally ill, but there's parallels to her kind of going through a metaphorical death with her divorce and her life and getting restarted. It's all set to the nitty-gritty backdrop of Los Angeles, but a Los Angeles that is very, mundane, and, maybe Evelyn moved there with dreams in mind or whatever, but it's not the sort of Los Angeles with the glitz and the glam and the aspiring or established actor. It's like someone who's just trying to get by and, like, just trying to, like, live their life, and they find this, like, weird niche job, but it's, these people are also, they have a strict process where they choose whether, it's not, they're not murderers, it's assisted death. These people have terminal illnesses, they are in extreme pain, and there's a very prolonged process to help them, but no matter what, it's, in a way, you're a hero, you're helping these people, but it's still death, and you're still helping someone die. And so it's macabre, but it's written with a little bit of hope and not necessarily optimism, but realism to it. And it's well done. I mean, all these books are well done, but I think this one in particular is very this is a great contemporary fiction novel that a lot of people can relate to, and it's realistic fiction with just that little tinge of weirdness, and something about this is not fully the universe that I recognize, to make it interesting and spicy enough. So that's that one. And then lastly, we have This Is Major, Notes on Diana Ross, Dark Girls, and Being Dope. So this is just a bunch of personal essays, like the title says, about being a Black girl, and it's really great. I mean, Blackness and her race is discussed, but it's nowhere near the I don't want to say intensity, because I think it would be remiss to sort of, comment on, as a white person, how, race. I think it's just, we're getting into touchy stuff, I'm sorry, but stuff where it's, it's not so much research based. It's very personal. It's very memoir based, and it's very about what her Blackness means to her. There's lighter essays, like Notes on Diana Ross, how seeing Diana Ross in The Wiz really inspired and created this hero woman and role model for her to look up to that she didn't see in media, and how Diana Ross herself was kind of played throughout media. There's also a bunch of essays about growing up as a Black girl in a predominantly white community, and instead of they try to assimilate as best as they can, and what that's like when, as you grow older, you learn that maybe that's not the best way to go through life, especially as you're exposed to other people of other backgrounds, and you kind of question, why did I have to assimilate, and why did I feel like I had to fit in? Even though she grew up in the South in Kentucky, she did lead a very sheltered life, and that comes into play in a lot of these essays. She also there's a really great essay about not being Twitter famous, and I totally relate to this, where it's no matter how hard you try and how cool you think your tweet is, you put it out into the universe and you're cool, I got one like. And she talks about how she literally paid for one of those services where they will have the bots follow you so your numbers can go up, because all the time I'm how are these people getting so many followers? Their tweets are not that good, and literally even the bots will not follow her tweets. For some reason they're not engaging. So there's a level of humor to that, but there's also a deeper level behind that. So it's really just a great balance of dealing with these deeper, darker issues, which are not always brought to the forefront in a more casual manner. I think that's what I was trying to say earlier, is it's very casual and cavalier, but still powerful. It's not necessarily presented with the here's years and years of research. It's I guess the research is just, Shayla's life, and they're all really well written, and they touch on little everyday things, but also larger things. And Goodreads is saying, it's similar to Morgan Jerkins and Samantha Irby and Roxane Gay, and those are all authors that I adore. And, clearly Morgan Jerkins was even featured in this, and it just happened to be that both of their books became available at the library at the same time. So that is the sixth one. That is it. Again, the audio cut out. I moved my hands too much. Jason, my boyfriend / producer, I am sorry when we are editing this, but I think it was towards the end, so it should be okay. So I hope you check out 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, all of the books. There's something for everyone in here. Make sure you are following me on Instagram and Goodreads so you can keep up with what I'm reading all the time. If, I'd love to know what you're reading, so comment below or message me. I'm always looking for the newest fun book to read. And I think that's everything. Energy's a little weird in this one. It's recording on a Sunday instead of a Saturday, so maybe that's it. Who knows? But I didn't want to let these books slip through the cracks, so here we are. And until next time, stay reading, guys.